You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Well, hello. I am excited that I'm Jim Morgan. I am with Fishers Historical Society, and today we have Dr. Shirley Smith, and I'm going to have her explain who she is and whatever. But we're here to talk about. Here we are. We're in the Independence Week. Independence Week here. So July 4th is on Friday. So Shirley and I decided that this was a great week to do for our Fishers History Chat. Information about our Revolutionary War heroes and patriots who are buried in Hamilton County, Indiana. So, Shirley, introduce yourself and who you are and what you do, and we'll probably get into some of the DR stuff as well. But tell us who you are and go from there.
Well, my degree, I have 2 degrees in history. I've always loved history. And especially, I think the Revolutionary War and colonial eras of history have been of special interest to me. I joined DAR, I believe, in 2003, and DAR is Daughters of the American Revolution, for those that don't know. And you have to have a patriot who served in some capacity, and there's a wide variety of capacities that served during that revolutionary time period. So they may have been soldiers, it may be a woman, uh, perhaps like Abigail Adams. She's been added to the Patriot list. I once did the genealogy for a lady out in New Jersey, and her patriot was a blind fiddler. He was 63 years old, and he followed the troops and played a fiddle. And he was considered a patriot because what all of these men and women did was commit treason against the British government. And had we not won the war, the sign of the Declaration of Independence and some of the military leaders would have been drawn and quartered. They would have been hung. It just depends on what their role was. And, many lives were lost among the men who enlisted and fought, or at least signed an oath of allegiance. And one of our Hamilton County people did that. And so I think people are really surprised to find out that there are men who served in that Revolutionary War buried in Hamilton County. Indiana wasn't a state, it wasn't even a territory. Everyone served from a state where they were born or had migrated to on the East Coast. But eventually they made their way to Indiana and to Hamilton County, raised families, bought land, farmed. Now, I think all of them probably were farmers, and they died here and left descendants.
Well, you've got something coming up too, by the way, that's pretty exciting. That shit. Let me see if we can get there. I'm going to go ahead and show it so you can talk about it here. Hang on a second.
Okay.
Okay, come on. There we go. So you want to explain this?
Yes. So back in 2019, when Horseshoe Prairie chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, which is a chapter that I'm a member of, Horseshoe Prairie's name came from the horseshoe in the White River, just
Horseshoe
north
Bend.
of the Conner area of the, Conner Prairies, we know it. And so that was our 50th anniversary in 2019. And Sharon McMahon, in particular, had this idea that why don't we try to get a plaque placed on the Veterans Memorial in downtown Noblesville? Because all the different wars are represented of men who passed away in each one of those, but not the Revolutionary War. And none of the men that are buried here died during the war, but they died here in Hamilton County. So we wanted to list their names permanently on that Veterans Memorial. So it's taken all this time, quite honestly, to make that come to this point where we can honor them, because there's a plaque has been placed. And the Hamilton County commissioners took this on and generously paid for the plaque and had it installed. So it lists all 15 men who are buried here. And we also have some blank places on that plaque, because once you think you've got everyone listed that's buried in Hamilton County, some family member will come up and say, well, my great 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 grandfather was also a patriot, he's buried here. So you hope you find them all, but different organizations and people in Hamilton County have been looking for them. since at least 1935, if not before. And the historical societies, the Sons of the Revolution. And so we took this project on, tried to find out as much as we could about each one of these soldiers, and some of them we know a lot about. So we're going to dedicate this plaque on July 26th. The public's invited, they always are, to all of our commemorations. There are going to be a lot of people there to speak. We have about 12 to 13 wreaths that will be laid by various organizations. We'll have DAR state dignitaries there. We have beautiful music, and it's just a nice time of the people of Hamilton County getting together, remembering why we have the freedom that we do from these men who served, who were just ordinary men like you are, and like our husbands and everyone else here lives in Hamilton County, but they chose to serve to try to make a new country, and they have that honor now.
Well, that's very exciting. So now, what got you started looking for the graves and the different ones that were in this the Revolutionary War people that here?
Well, we started our search by looking at old newspaper articles. Also, the Daughters of the American Revolution has from time to time published different books with lists of men. So out of the 15, we know where 9 of them are buried. There are 6 where we don't know they're buried. And, with all the building that goes on around here, every once in a while, we hope that maybe they'll come upon a patriot's grave. George Abney and Sam Torrance would be in Fall Creek Township somewhere. Micah French, I think, would be as well. And the reason we would believe that is because you look back at the old census, and these men lived to be 80, 90, even 100. They were so hardy. When you think about the fact that they walked from Virginia or Maryland or whatever to finally get to Indiana, and didn't have the medicine that we have now, and just all the things that, the good food or the variety of food that keeps people healthy. They lived very hardy lives, and I think we probably could learn something from them. Eli Coverdale is a good example. We commemorated him. He's buried out at the Bethel Cemetery in Wayne Township, the old Bethel Church, and that's at the crossroad of State Road 38 and Bowden Road. And we commemorated him last November by giving him a plaque, and also having a program very similar to what we're going to do July 26th. He died when he was over 96 years old, fighting a brush fire on his farm. I mean, he wasn't sitting in a rocking chair smoking a pipe and waiting to die. He was out there fighting a brush fire. And it just wasn't unusual for these men. And I think one of the most storied is Davis Welchel. He's buried in the old defunct Welchel Cemetery out at Oleo Road and 113th Street. And these cemeteries, as often as we try to find them, a lot of cemeteries are managed by trustees. But the Hamilton County Cemetery Commission took it upon themselves quite some time ago to try to have the cemeteries where the patriots are buried deeded to them so they can maintain them. And Davis Welchel is in one of those. And so he's back in the back behind a property. But he was an interesting character. He was born in Virginia, I believe. Let me look here quickly. Well, South Carolina. So he was a major, a lieutenant, a private, a ranger, and a spy. He was a busy guy. And so South Carolina is where he was from. I do have that written down. And so, these men served in the Revolution. They could have died just as easy as not. And then they just went on and lived their lives and, moved farther west. George Dale, who's buried at Riverside Cemetery. And there's descendants from all these people still in the area. So far, at every one of the commemorations we've had for one of the Revolutionary War patriots, we've had someone there that's a fourth great grandchild or a fifth great grandchild. That's really moving for us. It is for them to see their grandfather honored such a way as this.
Well,
So,
some of those names, on that list are old names in Hamilton County that I've known for, I've
oh
known
yeah,
generations of these people.
yeah. Dale and French and John Hare. John Hare. I mean, we know that name.
Coverdale
Yeah,
and
Coverdale. Holloway, Levi
yeah,
Holloway, and
uh,
Carey. Saul
yeah.
Carey. And he's one that we don't know where he's buried. He and Levi Holloway both served from Maryland, and they served in the same unit. And Carey was not given a pension. So in the beginning, shortly after the war, and the pension system came about to honor these men, the United States was not allowing men who didn't serve continuously to have a pension. So if they were in the militia 3 months, then went back home and did some farming for 6 months and came back for another 3, they didn't want to give them a pension. But later on, they relaxed that rule. So some of them, when you look back into history, they were denied a pension, even though they really did serve. And that wasn't unusual for them, if they were farmers to fight when the British got close to their homes or maybe even their state, and then they go back home and harvest the crops. And Micah French, he's from New York, and so we don't know a lot about him. He was denied a pension, but we know he served. And so all the men on this list don't necessarily have a record that's established with the Daughters of the American Revolution in DC. But in working with the commissioners, we gave them the information we had that proved in our minds that they had served, and that was good enough for them. And we may never find some of these people, their grave location. Samuel Torrens, David Welchel, Micah French, George Abney are all on the same 1838 census in Fall Creek Township, living apparently right next to one another.
Welchel's another name that's been around forever.
Oh yeah, yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, it's so fascinating. My own family, I've tried to do the roots type thing and doing all the ancestry. I cannot confirm 100% on this, but what we believe is the case. Part of my problem is I've got 3 great grandfathers in a row, all named Abel Morgan. So that becomes absolutely a nightmare trying to piece that
together. Yeah. And their wives are probably all named Sarah.
And then all of their siblings all had Abel as well. It was like, they all were. So they're trying to track all these people becomes. So I'm not exactly sure if the line goes this way, if it goes this way, but
right.
But I believe, and it makes sense, that my 4 times great grandfather supposedly served in the Marines in the Revolutionary War and was actually in one of the British prison ships, which the fact that he's alive, lived through that is amazing. But I was reading a book on the prison ships, and if he was a surgeon, it makes sense because the British did not allow anyone that could help and take some of the pain away from the prisoners in there. So as soon as they get someone that could actually be a service, they would trade them the prisoner swap to get them out of there because they wanted it to be as bad as possible.
Absolutely.
So that might have been what saved his life. Okay, but you look at where where there were different census things or different things, and it tracks with when the pioneers came because they couldn't pay the Revolutionary War soldiers, some of them had a lot of back pay that was due. Okay. And so they gave them land in the Northwest Territory. And so I have tracking him from Pittsburgh, from Pennsylvania, from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, which is where the launch was, to go on the flatboats down the Ohio to the Northwest Territory to get land. I was surprised to find him in Kentucky rather than in Ohio, because most of them went to Ohio. And what I found then, I saw another book. The whole family was very very big hardcore Baptist pastors, early Welsh Baptist pastors,
Mhm.
and the this place in Kentucky was a kind of a New Jerusalem for Baptists, and so that's probably made sense why he would have been there. But then he wanted to get out of the slave state into this new free territory, and he came into Indiana in 1810, is what I've got record of. So, and then eventually, he and I can't really decide if he died because I've got all these different people that have died down in southern Indiana, down in Martin, and
Mhm.
in down near Shoals and Lagodi. But I've got records of him being buried in Kentucky or Indiana, so I'm not really exactly sure. But
Right.
and also so it's like he's like 100 years old is what it appeared to. So, but it's just fascinating trying to find these pieces together. So he may be in Indiana. I don't know.
Mhm.
They did find. I saw this on Facebook, believe it or not, because turns out I've got like 28 dead great grandparents buried in those two counties. And I found there was a guy on Facebook that was digging up a space and was holding a skull in his hand because he unearthed a pioneer uh, graveyard that no one knew existed. And I was like, I've got to find, and I mean, it's right there. So I was trying to see if I could find out where it was because very, very good chance that I have family there, right?
Mhm. Right.
But I got a hold of the sheriff's office. It was off Facebook or whatever. And the sheriff's office said, look, and they named the guy. They said they were trying to keep him out of trouble because it's a felony to be holding a body part like that. And he had it on Facebook. So,
Yeah.
and then they were really closed mouth about where this place was. So I never got to find out. But anyway, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
fascinating stuff. So,
It
but
is,
that's how
and
they got here.
there's a
A lot of them probably got here because of the Northwest Territory land opportunity.
right. Yeah, the country was so poor they couldn't pay any of the
Yeah,
soldiers.
right.
A lot of the Continental soldiers seemed to get land in Washington County, Pennsylvania,
Hmm.
before about 1790. And some of the Hamilton County patriots, saw them come from Virginia. They typically went to Kentucky first, and I'm guessing because Indiana wasn't a state,
Right.
because Indiana didn't become a state until what 1816. It grew from the southern counties north, and so as those counties opened up, they started making their way into Indiana. And I remember reading about George Dale. He sold, he got an acre of land for a pound of feathers. Now, that doesn't sound like many feathers, but how many feathers does it take to make a pound? I mean,
That's quite
that's
a
a
bit of
lot of
feathers,
feathers, I
right?
think.
Yeah.
But they used feathers for their beds then. It was down beds, down pillows, if they even used pillows. But that's how he bought some land. And they brought their families, of course, and children were born all along the way. So some in Virginia, some in Kentucky, and then eventually they come to Indiana. And it's fun to look back in the old land maps for Hamilton County and see where their property was. Because that's, you can see, but they're in Fall Creek Township. And now George Dale seemed to be up in the area, I would say on the north part of Allisonville Road, but south of 146th Street. And he seemed to own a lot of land in that area. And then some of his family members, well, I know we used to live in Wabash, Indiana, and we were familiar with the Dale family. And I just was so curious to see if they would be related. I spent 8 hours one day looking into his son, Alexander, I believe. And he moved to Wabash County. And so I followed that trail. Sure enough, living relatives all over Wabash County. And so they were able to come to the commemoration. He's at Riverside Cemetery in Noblesville.
Okay. Right there right in town.
Yes, right in town. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where he's buried. Another one buried there is Lawrence Willison. And John Coburn, the judge, had a really interesting article. I'll just read it quickly to you because he was the first burial in Riverside Cemetery. Now, they don't know where he was buried. I'm guessing close to the river. But they're actually, the city of Noblesville is thinking about honoring him with a memorial this year because it's 200 years since his death and burial. But Judge Colburn talks about how Lawrence Willison was at the surrender of General Cornwallis at Yorktown.
Oh, wow.
I know, I know. And he died in a log cabin on Polk Street in Noblesville that stood on the lot that Frank Tissell now lives on. This was written about, I believe, 1880. Colonel Cogswell and myself laid him out and prepared him the best we could for his burial. Cogswell and I dug his grave, the first that was ever dug in the old graveyard. We had a very rough coffin. We put the old hero in it, nailed the lid on with rough nails, and got 2 other men to help us take him to the grave. I cut 2 hand spikes, laid them down on the ground, laid the coffin on the spikes, and the 4 of us carried him to his grave and buried him. There were no tears shed, no women, no preacher, no prayer, no laughing. And it was just us who helped, just me, them who helped me, and all the dead long ago. I'm here yet in my 86th year. So John Colburn was 86 when he was writing this, but I can't stay much longer with the people I love. So goodbye for time. But so that's, that's the proof that we know he served, because the people back then knew. They knew who those people were because they were still living at the time. So he died in 1825. So Jonathan Colburn was 86 when he wrote this article. So he was a young man when he prepared that coffin and buried him. And so Lawrence Willison is still at Riverside Cemetery in Noblesville today.
That's very cool.
Isn't that neat?
Yeah. I didn't realize that. I never thought about how old some of those graves were, probably right in town there. But yeah.
Right. And Willison and the Finches and Bush family were the first families who walked from Connorsville to settle Horseshoe Prairie, that little area just north of Conner Prairie. And they came in 1819. They didn't stake out their land. And several of the women and a couple children died the very first summer of what they call the fever being malaria. And, there was malaria right here in Indiana because of mosquitoes and so on.
Right.
And so that was a problem for quite some time. I'm not quite sure how it all ended. I've never studied that because, the people in the South knew to go up in the mountains or someplace where there weren't as many mosquitoes because they would get malaria. And once you have a case of it, I don't think it really goes away. You kind of just have to wear it out and it comes back. And so that's that just group of 3 families. Several of them died just the first August. By September or October, when it frosted, mosquitoes were dead. Then they started getting better.
I know that during the Revolution, the founding fathers had to keep running away from New York and Philadelphia because of they had to get out in the country to get away from malaria.
Yeah. They would often talk about the ague, and I'm not sure if ague was malaria or some type of congestion. My patriot that I went in the DAR with is one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and they lived in Elizabethtown, New Jersey. And so talking about those prison ships, he and my 5th great grandmother had 10 children. 5 of them died before they did. And 2 of the sons, my 4th great uncles, died because of their British imprisonment on those ships. One of them, Captain Thomas Clark, because of who he was, they put him in some kind of a dungeon on the ship and wouldn't feed him.
Right.
So if the soldiers had any moldy bread left, they would push it through a keyhole to try to keep him alive. But in the end, it didn't. By the time they released him, he just was too far gone. Keyhole back then was probably an inch tall, but a little bit of moldy bread's not going to keep you alive. And then their younger son, who was 19, I don't know much about him other than he died in the British prisons.
Well, I read an excellent book on those, and it was very, informative. I guess 11,000 people died on one of those boats, so
Yeah,
it was and it backfired on the British. They wanted it to be so horrific that word would get out and people would not join the military to because they don't want that possibility in their lives, but um, it ended up actually kind of galvanizing people more,
sure.
as they did this to people. So,
Yeah, it's hard to think of hating the British as an enemy now because, they're one of our allies. And a lot of us admire a lot of the things that the Brits um, do in their country as far as their food, or maybe even admire the king and queen and some of their royalty, which we fought against. But then they were the enemy. And, the American Indians sided with the British, which made it tough on them after the revolution. And then again in the War of 1812, the
with
same
the
thing
French,
happened. Yeah.
yeah,
And so, the treatment of the American Indians wasn't what we would hope it had been at this point in our lives. We understand how we pushed them out of their land, but unfortunately they chose the wrong side both times, and it kind of backfired on them.
right. And that because you go back to the Pilgrims time, and then after that there was there's now this is getting off our topic, but it's
Right.
the King Philip's Wars, in
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
1676 or whatever it was, 670. It turns out I found out that I actually have two relatives that died in that because
Ah.
King Philip, the several Indian tribes and the British settlers or whatever, and Holland settlers, whatever, the Europeans were really coexisting, and they actually had court systems. They were doing things together, that they would all abide by. It was a truly a community. And King Philip decided that he thought these people were taking up too much land and taking up too much, things. And so he decided to kill them off while there was still a small number of people, and would go door to door and kill people and burn the cabins and what have you. And they say it was the bloodiest civil war in history on this ground because 1,200 people died in it, which at that time, that's a lot of percentage wise, a high number
Mm-hmm.
of people. But and after that, the relationships soured dramatically as well.
Oh yes, yes.
So there's two sides of every story, and we just have a tendency to just want to talk about one. So.
Right. And there were lots of pockets where the American Indians and the settlers got along just splendidly.
Well, they did in
Uh,
this one until one guy
yeah.
decided to change the deal, and then what was funny is the in that war, like half the tribes were with the settlers and half the tribes were with uh, Philip, and one of his warriors, turned and went to get the settlers and led them to him, to end the war. So
Hmm.
it was complicated.
Oh yes.
Yeah,
Complicated and lots of spying
yeah,
and skullduggery, I'm sure,
yeah.
in any of those kind of that all's fair in love and war. I always like to think about our Hamilton County Patriots, wondering how well they knew one another, all 15 of them.
Right.
I suppose the ones that by townships were so important back then and have been in our history. I mean, some of them served together, like Cary and Holloway. And so they knew each other. And because when people migrated, they usually just didn't say, pick a space, pick a place, and let's just decide to migrate to Brown County, Indiana, or Knox County, one of the early counties. They usually knew somebody that had gone before them, or they've decided together, well, we heard that we could purchase land, and was now the Northwest Territory, and they're going to call it Indiana. So I have to think that some of the Virginia people, some of the Maryland people will know that Cary and Holloway knew each other, and that's how they got here. And Coverdale's from Delaware, and perhaps he knew someone that was already here, and a lot of Coverdale still um, in the area as well.
I'm not a big reader of fiction, okay, but I one of my favorite historians, David McCullough, and he was endorsing and praising this trilogy of uh, American history fiction by Conrad
Mm,
Richter. And McCullough did such a great job selling me on it. I ended up buying his trilogy, and because what he was saying is, he goes, it was fiction, but he did such meticulous research to what the life was like, what the language was like, what the culture was like, so that you would get a snapshot of what that life was. And
hmm
this one is called, and I recommend it to anyone, especially anybody in the Midwest, the part of the Ohio, or the Ohio Valley, or the
And
Northwest
Northwest
Territory,
Territory.
because it starts right after the Revolutionary War. Okay, when
hmm
they went west to to this territory to stake out land and what have you. And the first book is called The Trees, because it was coming into all this virgin timber that was,
Oh, yeah.
that were like mammoth trees, things we've never seen. Okay, and literally the entire area was covered with this, and they had to carve out a life inside those trees. Then they had to cut those trees down, and then it's called The Trees, the Fields, and then the Town. Okay,
hmm
it talked about this, and it ends right before the Civil War. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah,
and
you
the
see that progression. Yeah.
yeah, but it's fascinating to read, because you're sitting there going, these people that we're talking about tonight lived it.
hmm
That was what they came and saw, and what they did, and it really helps you put perspective, on. I mean, it wasn't like they decided to move to a new city and they moved in, and all the infrastructure is in place and everything's ready to go. They had to
Right.
literally carve it out of the wilderness.
They did. They carved it out of the wilderness. And there's a great book, I can't think of the author right now, about what it was like in this area, Marion County, especially when his family moved here. And he talks about that canopy of trees being so thick that it was rare for the snow to ever get to the ground. It stayed
Yeah,
up in those trees. And they pretty much lived on venison and eel and whatever they could find, wild turkeys. I loved how they caught wild turkeys. I thought it was so ingenious. They would build like a lean-to and put something almost like fencing of some kind. I'm sure it was some kind of sticks or something that were vertical, but they dug this pit. So and they put corn in it. So the turkeys would get there, get in that pit, and they'd eat the corn and get themselves into that lean-to fence, and they weren't smart enough to get out. So that's how they caught turkeys. They didn't have to go out and just shoot them. I
yeah.
thought that was ingenious. And they lived pretty much on what they could catch and shoot and eat, and cornbread. They had cornmeal,
Mhm.
and they had cornmeal for breakfast. They had something like mush and maybe put some maple syrup on it. Then for lunch, they had cornbread again. Then for supper, they had cornbread again. And when wheat was introduced to Indiana, the women started using wheat, and the men complained because they didn't like it; just didn't have any taste, and they were used to that cornbread.
Mhm.
And so it's really interesting to see how simply they lived, but it was all about survival. And the Indians had taught them how to cut the trees down by banding them. So they would band them until it would reach in through the bark and kill the tree.
Right.
And then they didn't plant big fields. And initially, they would just plant around where that tree canopy had died off. And I can't imagine, cutting all the logs it took to build a home, and and to try to keep warm all year. So it's very interesting to see how far, I guess, that we've come um, from that time, because they were such survivors.
Yeah, it was, and the amount of work that it took to make it
Mm,
happen. It's just kind of hard to get your head wrapped around. I grew
yes.
up on a livestock farm. We thought we worked, but when you start thinking about what those guys were doing, they didn't have any power equipment or anything else to do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I don't think they even had plows, early at all.
yeah.
That was in starts with industrialization, and of course that changed their lives tremendously too. But they couldn't afford a lot of equipment. early as well. They just still used the horses and oxen and their homemade plows.
Well, that went on for a while. I've got a picture of my grandfather. Okay, my great grandfather, was Barney Morgan, and I've got a picture of him sitting on a old disc, driving two mules in the middle of Fishers, right there off Lantern Road, just north of 106th Street. So,
Uh,
and that would have been, they moved here in 1935. So sometime after that. So
yeah, that's not that long ago.
I
I mean,
know.
it's almost 100 years now, but you and I are old enough. I'm older than you that we can remember a lot of those things that have changed so much in the way they used to be.
Right.
The older
Yeah.
equipment.
Yeah. Right now there's all apartments where that where that
I
field
bet.
was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. Now I used
Yeah.
to, when I was a kid, I used to farm that field, and and in fact, I was back when they do what they call government ground, where they paid you to not farm it. Okay,
Right. Right.
and you had to bush hog it, a couple times a year to keep the weeds from being whatever. So I was out there doing that, and at this time there was a cab, so I was probably 10, because we had a cab on it. But with all that pollen, the cab you couldn't see out of it. It was all pollened out, and I hit a drainage tile break and broke the whole front of the tractor off and fell off in there. But I was in
Wow.
in that same field, still as a field at that time. So
Uh-huh.
when I was a little kid. So so when I see the picture of him with the mules, it just kind of it's like, that's kind of cool. Yeah. So
Yeah. I didn't know they used mules that much in Indiana, but I mean, they're stronger than a horse, I take it.
right.
I mean, because they're that cross, but yeah. You see them use them a lot in Pennsylvania yet today. Among the
Yeah.
Amish, they'll use mules.
Well, they use those draft mules. Yeah. So they do a lot
Yeah,
of that stuff.
and
Yeah.
those too, yeah.
Yeah. Well, from what I understand, it wasn't until I started doing the history that I actually was able to put the pieces together. I had always heard these stories about how my great grandfather had moved from southern Missouri up here and had ridden and had driven this wagon of mules up from Missouri to Fishers. Well, they called it
Wow.
Delaware at the time, and I never could figure out where that was. And then all of a sudden, they lost their farm down in Lagodi during the um, Great Depression,
Oh,
and he was apparently sharecropping or doing something down in someplace down in Missouri, and then they got this opportunity to come to Fishers, and
mm-hmm.
so he brought his team of mules and his wagon all the way from
Wow.
there. So yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Well, and the roads back then, if you want to call them roads, were nothing but old buffalo traces usually,
right,
and maybe places that the Indians were able to walk through and hunt. And then later stagecoaches, came through there, and they started the tolls. Farmers would um, they got tired of the settlers from the east coming across their property if there was a road, so they would dig like a pit, and they put spikes on like a log, and they'd turn it up so that any wagons couldn't go across. And I suppose you couldn't walk your cattle through either, if you're bringing a cow with you. So they'd have to pay a toll. And then that's how it came to turnpike. So they they would turn that pike down into that ditch so that the family could pass on. So
that was where the
the
turnpike came from.
turnpike, that's where it came from. You had to pay a toll to go through that farmer's land. And what the toll, I don't know if it was actual money. It probably wasn't. Maybe it had to be a few loaves of bread or some cornbread or whatever you had extra. Hopefully not one of your children or something. But they would turn that turnpike down, pikes that were um, uncomfortable for anybody to walk through or your animals.
That's crazy. Yeah, but I love it when you figure out where some of these names came from that
Yeah.
we just use every day and don't know where they
Oh
originated.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's always a history behind even the something that we use like that all the time.
Well, thank you for getting all this thing together. You and your team for putting that stuff together for the 26th. That's phenomenal. I am probably tonight beginning my every year thing that I do. I don't know if you've ever watched it or not. If you haven't, then I strongly recommend it. HBO did David McCullough's John Adams in a 7-part miniseries,
Series, yeah.
and it's amazingly accurate. Okay,
Yeah.
there's two things in it that kind of get into my skin because it's not exactly accurate, but two things in about 7 hours is pretty good. Okay.
Right.
um, and one of them is something that you have to be a complete nerd to have a problem with, okay, is because the cattle that were in his field were Simmentals, so they didn't come here till 1967. But yeah,
I wouldn't have known. No.
yeah, so but I was one of the ones that brought I was one of the ones that brought Simmentals to Hamilton County.
There you go.
Yeah, so I do remember that. Um,
Well, and
but
I had the chance to meet David McCullough once. He was here at Friends of the Library in Nora.
really,
Yes, and it was right after he published John Adams. I don't know how I found out about it. It was standing room only, and he's one of my favorites too.
oh,
You
I
know,
love his. He makes
the
life, makes everything come to life.
it's
So
so real, yeah. And have you ever seen the PBS John Adams?
no,
It's fantastic. And I every time he gets to the point where he's talking about John Adams and Thomas Jefferson dying
hmm,
on the 50th anniversary of the
yeah,
Declaration of Independence. He says the bells were tolling all over Virginia. And these two men, he said, if you would have written this in a movie, people would
no one
say,
would believe it.
that didn't happen, but it did.
Yeah,
And he talks about how people then thought it was providential.
yeah,
That those two great men that were that had
kind of the North
formed
and the
that
South.
document, yeah,
Yeah, they were opposite
died.
ends of a lot of ideology, but they were both
Yeah,
they thought the way through.
they did. They were great friends in the beginning, and then they were estranged for quite some time, and then became started writing one another,
Yeah.
and then died great friends. But it's just amazing to think that they died on the 50th anniversary on the same day as if it was scripted. And
Well,
David
every year I
McCullough,
watch that whole 7-part series again. So, and I
yeah,
finish it up on the fourth, but um it's just one of my things. I have certain things that I like to do, so
yeah,
for D-Day I always on the 5th, not the 6th, I watch Ike uh the eve of D-Day, which is Tom Selleck did it's one of my favorite war movies that's ever been done, and there's not a single shot fired in it.
oh,
But it's all the prep and what have you. So, but
yeah.
but this is my week for John Adams
For
again.
John
So,
Adams, yeah,
yeah,
he was a remarkable man. We had the opportunity to go to Quincy and see where he and Abigail lived, and they show that same house in the PBS John Adams,
oh,
and
that's what is that where it is? Yeah,
yes, and it's Abigail spent so much time away from him, or
right,
he did away from her. Something like 14 years or 7 years of the first 14 years they were married, he wasn't home
right.
because he was, in Philadelphia, going overseas, whatever. The whole family, and I would say it was true of all these patriots in Hamilton County. They fought the war together because they
Right.
all sacrificed something for their husband and their father to be out there defending what they believed in.
John Quincy Adams. Here, here's the situation. His dad was gone most of his young life getting started,
Yeah.
and then John took him with him to go to France, to Paris, to
Mm-hmm.
be the plenipotentiary there. Okay, during while they're going through this whole process before the treaty took place or whatever. And so
Right.
they get there, and while John Quincy was 14, John sent him off with the ambassador to Prussia, and so he became a secretary to this guy at 14 years old and spent all this time. So there was probably no one better prepared to be
Right.
president than Quincy when John Quincy
Yeah.
came back, because he spoke all these languages. He'd been all over the world. He done all these things from the time he was a baby.
Yeah, and had been tutored, as a friend by Jefferson as well
Right.
when they were in
Exactly.
Paris,
Yeah.
because the Adams family and Jefferson was over there, and they just enjoyed one another's company very much. And it's a really neat relationship that I've enjoyed reading some of their letters, over
Yeah.
time.
And I'm right now reading a book that I'm really enjoying. It's on Francis Marion, the Swamp
Mm,
Fox. And
yeah.
the movie The Patriot is loosely,
Yeah.
that, but
Based. Yeah. Right.
yeah, but I've always thought that one was kind of a mixture of General Morgan and Marion and some other people thrown in there to that particular movie. But uh, but this book is really good. It goes into all the some of the different things that he was doing, and not there's so much of him that's legend that it's hard. Even the historians are having a hard time going. Well, this was definitively what happened. That type of
Right.
thing.
Right.
But
Well,
he
yeah. There.
basically, yeah,
I remember when the Patriot was when it came out and when it was fairly popular. One of the ladies I was working with came to work one day. She said, "I never realized the British were so um, violent." I said, "It was a war.
yeah,
They were
exactly,
killing each other. They were fighting a cause, and they were going to give the country up to the American. And there's only about 10% of Americans who actually
well, yeah,
were who fought. Who
right,
were really on the American side. There were a lot more loyalists and people who just
well,
faded in the background and waiting for it to
it was
end.
more of a civil war than it was a war with British.
Almost, yeah.
And most of the deaths in the South, in the Carolinas, were Tories versus Patriots. It was not.
Right,
Rarely was a British person even involved. So
right.
so we don't. Well, we don't study history, so people don't know these kind of things. So anyway,
Yeah. Well, they were. I mean, there were cousins because almost all of them were from England.
right,
But they just could not take the Americans had developed their own identity.
right,
They had been in the colonies long enough that they developed their own identity, and the British, I don't think, understood that well, not well enough, and it was their country. And that's how the Americans looked at this is our country, and you're telling us we're going to pay taxes to you for what? Because
yeah,
the French and Indian War, put the British in debt, and so
right.
they wanted the money back from the Americans.
Well, I read a book now. This one to me was like heaven on. I loved this book. My wife, when I just started telling her what it was, her eyes glassed over and was like, "Okay." Um, but it had all the hot buttons for me. But it was I think it's called Unruly Americans, or I have to find it exactly. But it was the macroeconomics and the political civics of what was going on, and it was basically where the economics and the civics and the politics all came together, and like I said, there was no question that we were going to have a revolution
Hmm.
because the American people had a totally different mindset than any of the other colonies, and they were far enough removed that they kind of could grow up on their own. We started this very independent process,
Right.
and then our economic structure was directly in conflict with what the British were trying to do, and he said it was so inevitable. Because looking back, there was no way it wasn't going to happen. So
Right. It was a perfect storm because they
yeah,
were really um, pressuring the merchants. They were pressuring the farmers. They couldn't get ahead at all. They just
yeah,
were keeping them hamstrung, and they couldn't make any money. They couldn't make ends meet, and they basically had forced slavery on them in the North and South. And they
right,
didn't want that, but yet they couldn't get out of it and couldn't figure that out either. Because, in the first draft of the Declaration of Independence, um, Thomas Jefferson talks quite a bit about slavery and how
yeah,
it was forced upon them. They were born into it like the slaves themselves. The
right.
king
It
forced it.
came from it came from the British,
Yeah, it came from
and
the
then
British. Yeah,
and then it was one of those situations that you look at Jefferson, you look at Washington, Washington, they were trying to figure out how to get out from under it, and maybe not for the reason we wanted them to, okay,
right,
but
right,
from an economic standpoint, it was crushing them.
right. It
In
was
fact, slavery would have ended. The irony is, slavery would have absolutely ended from a economic standpoint way before it did if it wasn't for the cotton gin being invented.
exactly. Yeah.
Because up until then, slavery was a burden on people were going broke trying to feed and to
Hmm.
house and to do this. And so they were all trying to figure out how to get out from it. And then also the cotton gin showed up, and then it was like,
Yeah, then
you know,
it's
totally changed the game.
established. Yeah,
Yeah. So
it is, and it did leave the northern states, earlier.
yeah. Oh yeah. Well, they were abolitionists. A lot of them, about the time we were doing the Constitution. So
Right,
yeah,
right.
which is why we had the 3/5 thing. So
Oh yes, yeah.
the
They
Nor-
didn't want the Virginians to have so much say so because they were the biggest state, the most powerful state.
yeah, well, it's like right now the big argument is in fact it's about history is repeating itself right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's right now Congress is trying to get to where they can't count illegals as census. Well, that's exactly the same argument that was going
Right,
on
right.
there, and it's
It
all
is,
about
yeah,
political power, how many representatives you have.
yeah. That's right.
Yeah, so again, we don't teach history, but
That's right. Well,
yeah.
I don't know why.
Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. This was fun, it
Yeah.
really was. So,
Well,
so
I really hope people do want to learn more about our Hamilton County Patriots and can come to that dedication. We're going to try to do a brief history on all 15 of what we know. And we were hoping to publish a book of some time, just a local history
that's
book
awesome.
where we talk about these men. And, the research never ends because maybe we will find where some of these people are buried and find more information out about them over time that we can add to the story.
Well, one thing I would hope that John would put some kind of a plaque or something, some kind of a thing at the military museum, Hamilton County Military Museum in Carmel now. That would
That
be a
would be nice
perfect
too.
thing for
Yes,
it to
it
be
would be.
yeah.
Yeah, because they're going to be there. The plaque is there at the Veterans Memorial now.
But what I'm saying is maybe we could get another one for that
Yeah,
museum or something that would also honor
yeah,
them.
to spread it around. I mean, how many of the Carmel and Westfield and Sheraton people will come to Noblesville and never notice that?
Yeah.
But and there's people out there in that area that are buried too. One out in Boxley.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us. I appreciate it. We may have you back on talking about some of the DAR stuff sometime down the road
Okay,
too. Okay.
sounds good. Be my pleasure.
All right. Take care now.
Take care. Bye.
Bye bye.